Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and welcome to the 1-year anniversary of the launch of the PlayStation 5. Yes, it has already been a year, although to me it feels a lot shorter because I've only had it for a couple of months. But today what we're going to do is talk about the history of the last year with the console, some of the games, maybe some projections, all that sort of stuff. Before we do that though, if you can please do me a favor, like this video, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed. Go in the social media stuff in the description, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, all that sort of stuff. Please follow me on there. As well as, if you don't mind, please check out my new channel, which is called Flying and Eating. It's literally what it sounds like. I just fly to places and I eat stuff. And yeah, I know I'm fat, I get it. But I would really appreciate the support over there if you've enjoyed any of the content I've made over the years. I'm just trying to get that channel started. So thank you very much. The link to all that sort of stuff is in the description. Now, this channel, let's talk about this. A proud tradition I have is to talk about these consoles on their birthdays when they're super relevant. I used to do this, of course, for the PS4 and the Xbox One and the Wii U. No longer do those as they're no longer the dominant consoles, but I did this already for the Xbox Series X this year, and now it's time for this. The Switch will come in March when it's time. So with the PS5, first and foremost, I think the most obvious thing to say about it, just like the Xbox Series X, is it's still really bizarre that you can't go into a store and just buy one. At least the Xbox Series X, I was able to pre-order it. I got that down. I was able to do the video right away at the beginning, review, unboxing, all that sort of stuff. This one, though, I couldn't get it till whatever it was, September of this year, or 2021 anyway. And that was partially due to, how hard it is to actually get them. It's also because of my own reasons, which, if you never saw those videos, I did a review as well as an unboxing where I basically told a long story short here. My mother passed away about 1.5 years ago at the time this is coming out. And when she died, I had to close her accounts for various things, including her credit card. And our credit card had a whole bunch of points, built up, as happens with credit cards. She never seen, either she didn't notice them or didn't care or whatever. But they were sitting there, and I had the option to basically redeem them before canceling the card. So I redeemed them for a whole bunch of Best Buy gift cards, and I was very adamant on having to use them to get a PS5. It had to be at Best Buy. And the reason wasn't just, hey, I want to save some money. It was literally I got game consoles from my mother as a kid. It's really what kind of got me into all of this stuff, and it was very important to me. And while she's no longer with us, and she could no longer do anything like that for me anymore, at least in that weird way and through that connection, if you will, she was able to do it one last time. And so that meant a lot to me. Now, I know that has nothing to do with the history of the console. I'm simply saying that's how extremely difficult PS5s are to get. And still are. Now, hopefully that changes. But, Sony came out and they're killing it. They're absolutely killing it. They're super successful. Unlike the Series X, which, yes, is hard to get, the Series S you can walk in pretty much anywhere and get. Nobody really wants it. But even the digital edition of the PlayStation 5, people buy. They just don't seem to buy it as much as the disc edition. Occasionally you'll get lucky and find a digital one just sitting on a store shelf somewhere, but the physical one, you just don't see it. Unless it's a complete fluke somewhere. But which I kind of talked about this extensively in the Xbox anniversary video, but basically, long story short with that, I believe that both of them came out with this strategy of, let's have a digital and a physical edition so that we kind of appeal to both bases, and we'll kind of root for the digital edition to win, but we'll still support the physical one. And I think they both had different strategies with that. I already talked extensively about Microsoft's, but theirs, in short, would be give them a much cheaper version of the console, a much more anemic version, and hopefully just get more people addicted to Game Pass. Sony's strategy, I think, was they were probably really betting on digital as an all-digital distribution, but not with the equivalency of a Game Pass-like service, as it still doesn't really exist. But if they could control that, they would have more monopolistic ability to sell you games when you're already addicted to the PlayStation brand. You don't have a choice. You can't get it anywhere else, as is the nature of digital gaming distribution, at least on home consoles. But I'm sure that, they kind of thought, last minute, we kind of need to put a disk drive in there. Hence, it kind of looks like this weird tumor and all that. And to their credit, they do completely support that it has the disc edition and all that sort of stuff. But they only made the console the identical hardware and just about $100 cheaper, and I think they thought that would have worked. I think the grand irony is if you had switched the two, if Sony had launched a PS5 that was $200 cheaper but was more anemic, I actually think that might have worked just because they don't have Game Pass. They just would have had a much cheaper version of it where you could get all the digital games, you know, whatever. And the vice versa, I think the reason people don't buy the Series S is because they know it's anemic compared to the Xbox Series X, while also having this massive digital infrastructure, aka Game Pass. Imagine a version of the Xbox Series X, which was $100 cheaper, didn't have the disc drive, but was just as hardware capable and had all of Game Pass on it. I think that would be a lot more successful than the Series S, and exactly the opposite for the PS5. If the PS5 was $200 cheaper, even if it was more anemic, since there is no constant flow of digital content through a Game Pass-like service, I think it might have worked. So, lucky for me as a physical gaming guy, that's not the direction both of them went, and I do believe that both of the digital editions will be dissolved probably within a year or two in this generation. Next generation's a different discussion, of course, but this time around, I think that's kind of the direction we're going. Now, that said, what about the console itself within the last year? Well, obviously very successful, on path to be a juggernaut of success, and to me is also kind of a strange anomaly because, you know, if you saw my Xbox videos when it first came out, as well as the one I just did, I basically said, like, the console came out and it was fine. It felt like a physical firmware upgrade. There really wasn't any problems with it, but there was also nothing really that interesting or exciting about it. It was just kind of the hardware upgrade. It kind of felt like, you know, going from a current ecosystem phone you have, like a Pixel, to the new model of the Pixel, or from an iPhone to the new model of the iPhone. It's not a whole lot different. You're just upgrading a little bit of the hardware. Sony, to their credit, is still following the traditional video game model. And I give them massive respect for that. So let's explore that, because I think that's actually kind of an interesting discussion to have now at this point in time as it's happening. For those who are not really clear on the difference, like I said, Xbox is going for that, like, let's say the cell phone model, where it's basically the same thing, just hardware is a little bit better, but it feels like all your stuff's backwards compatible instantly, all your apps and everything are there, all your information is there. It's just, oh, it's a little bit faster now, it looks kind of, whatever. Camera's better, whatever. Sony, on the other hand, historically, with all consoles, it's always been like, okay, our console has to thrive on everything that is unique about it. What does it look like? What kind of games does it play? Does it use cartridges? Does it use discs? What kind of discs? You know, etc. Is it compatible with other things? Is it not? Does it have online support? Does it have, you know, which developers are behind it? What in-house games can we, as a company, make that make it exclusive that no one else can get? You know, is the controller different? All those kinds of things that make consoles interesting as unique pieces of history aren't really there with the Series X. Like I said, that doesn't feel like that. It just feels like the latest one until they replace it. It has no impact in of itself as a device. Sony is still using the older model, where, you know, this is a completely unique looking device. It has, you know, I'm not going to say entirely unique hardware, but it has unique elements to it. You know, its controller is completely unique. Its operating system is essentially unique. It looks very different as far as, like, you know, all sorts of performance. Its game cases are traditional. There are PS5 games. I got 4 just sitting here on the table that use traditional game cases, game discs, and game artwork that are different. Whereas I said, if you saw the Xbox Series X video, they basically don't have physical editions or even unique Xbox Series X specific games, with just a handful of exceptions, like Flight Simulator. So this feels more traditional. However, while the historian in me and the nostalgia fan in me is totally in favor of that concept, because I love consoles and I love console history, I do have to admit that Sony seems to be in a weird position where they're clashing with modern expectations. Modern expectations, largely set by cell phones, as I said, is to just periodically upgrade. And they themselves are guilty of it, too, with, like, the PS4 Pro and whatnot. But Microsoft just embraced that. And they said, yeah, you know what, this is just the next thing, all of our stuff's cross-compatible, whatever. Not to say that Sony hasn't at all. I mean, obviously, I even said in my initial review of this thing, this is the best version of the PS4 that's ever existed, you know? But it is getting there, as far as being its own unique voice. And that's where I think stuff is clashing, because you kind of have I think Sony went into this with the, let's go with the traditional mindset, because it's always really worked for them, with the vague exception maybe of, like, I mean, you could include the handhelds, I suppose, but as far as home consoles, the only time that didn't kind of work out for them was the PS3, and the PS3 did eventually find its footing, But that was about it. Like, for the most part, when they followed their own traditional, like, this is what our console is, and it's totally unique, and blah, 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 it works out. And they went with that. But where it's clashing is people are like, okay, cool, but, like, can I play all my PlayStation stuff on it? Well, no, you can't. All right, well, I want to play, my exclusives. Like, 'cause they've got exclusives, right? Like, Microsoft isn't bothering with that as much. But now Sony's kind of being forced into these weird positions where some of their exclusives are being plucked from them, whether they consent or not in certain cases, and it just feels bizarre to people. Like, God of War, I'm not a PC gamer, obviously, but you know where I'm going with this. God of War is now, or is soon to be, available on PC. And if you watched Twitter and so on and so forth when that happened, PlayStation fanatics were losing their minds over it because they're not used to the idea that their precious PlayStation exclusives can end up on competitive hardware. It's bizarre. And kind of, even as someone who's not like the biggest super fan, I'm kind of with you. Like, it's strange to ultimately see Super Sony exclusives end up on not Sony consoles. Or a more amusing example would be like MLB The Show, a franchise that has always been with the PlayStation brand. The Major League Baseball forced them to put it on Xbox. So if Sony had to develop a game for the Xbox Series X and Xbox One, which is just kind of like... So that's where I'm saying that modern trends are starting to clash with the PlayStation brand. And so that puts Sony in a weird position where they're kind of trying to be old school and having to embrace new expectations and being like stunned that people are kind of surprised by it. And I know you're probably thinking like, is he seriously suggesting that PS5 is not a success or isn't going to work? Has he seen the numbers? Yes, I have. I'm not saying that at all. PlayStation 5 is a massive success. Let's not get it twisted. I'm just saying for historical purposes, it's interesting because it is, I think eventually we're going to look back on it as like this weird last throwback to a traditional model. You ask me right now what I'm betting on, the next iteration of PlayStation, whatever it is, you want to, probably PS6, I'm sure that's a big spoiler, nobody could have guessed that name, will probably be very similar to the PS5 in the hardware department, but like upgraded and all that. And they'll probably have a lot of compatibility with it and all that sort of stuff, but they'll probably also massively upgrade their digital infrastructure and try to create their own iteration of Game Pass. And rather than have like this uniqueness that they do, they'll probably try to be like, hey, we're just going to keep the same ecosystem across the board. Like when they were kind of rocking the cross-media bar for like the PSX, and when I say PSX, I mean the Japanese PS2 DVR, the PS3 and the P, where they were kind of trying to keep it all the same. I feel like they're going to kind of go back to that as like a permanence, just kind of like the way Microsoft has now done it with all their Xbox iterations. As it stands, PS Vita, PSP, PS3, PS4, and PS5 all can connect online still, although granted the handhelds, the PSP especially, are very gimped, but you can still do it, and they basically all have totally different dashboards with the lesser exception of the PSP and the PS3, obviously. And it's like, they don't feel like a family in what our modern expectations. Whereas past expectations, that was the way we wanted it. And now, for some reason, we want it exactly the other way around. To me, it's kind of like how Apple convinced everyone that the headphone jack was out-of-date technology, and that if you had it, you sucked. We're kind of like taking away a feature and something that was always considered good, and a PR guy convinced all of us we were totally wrong, and it's exactly the opposite. That's kind of what I feel like we're right in the middle there, in this like lull space where that's what's happening to PlayStation. And I don't like it, But at the same time, if I'm going to be totally honest with you, so I play both of these, right? Let me show you some footage. Let's put up a game here. Why not? We got Assassin's Creed Valhalla running here. I want to give a shout out to Ubisoft. They were cool enough to provide me with some games for me to be able to show you guys. So check them out if you haven't, although I'm sure you've played Assassin's Creed Valhalla or had access to it. It's on a whole bunch of platforms. I just kind of want to throw out something to think about. The idea that now we are actually going to be able to enjoy these games years down the road on this particular console. If you're not aware, earlier this year there was a big hullabaloo. I mean, I'm included in that. I made a video about it, about the PlayStation CMOS battery bomb. Now, in short, what that was, and that's a key word, was an issue that was inside of both the PlayStation 3, well, I should say all three, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5. It was a hardware choice, a design choice that Sony made, where there's a little battery inside the console, and if it dies, and the console is unable to connect to the internet, if it can't do one or the other thing, then even if you replace the battery but it can't establish a new connection, essentially your games stop functioning. In the case of the PlayStation 3, it could still read physical games regardless, but it would not read your digital games if the console cannot have a functional battery with a functional internet connection. It's more complicated than that, but in short, it was an issue. PlayStation 4, same basic thing, except it was affected physical games. So both physical and digital games did not function properly with the CMOS battery bomb issue in place. The PlayStation 5 was a little less egregious in that its disc-based games still worked, albeit somewhat limited. Sometimes they would fail to install after beyond like 95% and things like that, but digital games did not function. We have to remember that that was a design choice that Sony made for the better part of almost 2 decades. However, after enough pressure has been applied to them, they did address this. They updated the PlayStation 4 first because it was the most egregious, and the CMOS battery bomb issue seems to have been completely resolved in the PS4, which means the longevity of the console is far better than it once was, which makes me very happy. And as I'm recording this, they just really updated the PlayStation 5 again, so the CMOS battery bomb is essentially now eliminated in those two consoles for the most part. PlayStation 3 they didn't address, and I don't think they're going to be completely honest, but hey, you know, at least your physical games will work on that. But just again, just kind of a reminder, digital games are not property. They're a rental. They're a license agreement that is temporary and is completely at the will of the parent company that, you know, gives it to you. They can take it away. So whatever, that's a different discussion entirely, but I just wanted to basically make the point that if you were worried about the CMOS battery bomb issue in both the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5, it has essentially been resolved. But, you know, when I play this game, or I play any other game, like, I certainly can enjoy it on PlayStation hardware, and I'm getting to a point now, though, like, if I boot up my Xbox Series X, it just feels more comfortable. And that's probably what they're banking on, because, you know, you boot it up and it just feels familiar, because you're like, oh, this is the same ecosystem I've been using forever, all my stuff is here, everything transferred over, it's super convenient, easy, whatever, and I'm used to it. And it's all there. PlayStation, admittedly, every time you get one, you kind of have to relearn everything. And you can't, I'm not saying I'm not willing. I am a tech guy to an extent, and I obviously love consoles and all that. But I have to believe that that's something of a factor, where there's like this learning curve for not only the end user, but also for the companies. Now, granted, what's under the hood isn't a huge deal for, say, developers. I mean, they can obviously, again, the PS5 and Xbox Series X are largely identical hardware with just, you know, a few differences here and there. In fact, you know, let's run another game on it. Let's play some Far Cry 6 here for a bit. Also, again, Ubisoft, thank you very much for supplying this so that I could show it to people. But, you know, like the hardware under the hood might be very similar, but on the outside, things like the dashboard, the software, all that sort of stuff, where people kind of have to learn all of that over again. I feel like that in an era where everybody's just kind of getting used to their own pre-existing ecosystem on their phone or whatever, Sony is just using the old model. And I do wonder if they're going to try to unify things at a certain point. It's just, I don't know, you know, and we've seen where that actually causes real world problems. So if you go back and watch my initial PS5 video, like my initial review, which again, I got it late, you know, I got it in like September of this year. And so it had already been out for like over 9 months. It had had system updates and all that sort of stuff to stabilize it. But even when I got it, it had various bugs in it that was causing problems. You know, I had it and like games would self-delete. I showed footage of all of this happening and I was like, my Series X never did any of this to me. And part of the thing is that it's not just the end user who's becoming more comfortable with those types of, you know, the dashboards. Sony has to essentially relearn an entire operating system that they themselves create every time, and then they have to get it up to speed. Now, I'm happy to report that a year later, there have been enough system updates that the self-deleting thing doesn't seem to happen anymore. They've addressed certain issues. I still have hard drive problems. Like, I can't get a drive above 8 terabytes to work on this. I can't even get my 8 terabyte drive to work on it because it recognizes as 8.01 terabytes, which is just like a little too big for it to acknowledge. That's a system update that just needs to happen, Sony. Seriously, you've been doing that since the PS4. But anyway, all I'm saying is, as much as I love that Sony is sticking to that traditional model, it is conflicting with modern times, and it causes them problems. And so there is a logical case to be made that Sony will probably have to adapt and do a more unified thing where they just kind of keep the system kind of the same. And that makes sense. And at the same time, I hate it because it's not unique or interesting. That's exactly how I feel about the Series X. Like, I love it for its ecosystem, but as a piece of hardware and a piece of history, it's irrelevant. I do want to take 1 second, though, while we're playing Far Cry 6 to acknowledge something that is truly unique, special, and very next-gen about the PS5, which is the controller. I know I talked about that in my review, but man, unless you've played with it, you don't really get it. Like, that is a special controller. That controller might actually be my favorite controller ever produced. And games that take advantage of it, like, really take advantage of it. It is... I said this more elaborately in my review, but it does feel like one of those handful of things left where, okay, this is special. This is a leap forward because of how smart the vibration is in it. You know, I've always seen vibration as just kind of like a bonus, like, oh, okay, it's just kind of somewhat interactive with the console. But this actually feels like immersion. And it's kind of hard to describe unless you actually play it, but with its little speaker system and like even the triggers, like they feel like they respond differently based on different games. Now maybe that's not actually true, it's just how it feels psychologically, but it's cool. Like the triggers actually feel more like a gun when you play Far Cry 6, for example, and I don't recall them having that sort of stiffness in other games. And I'm not saying that's actually how it is, but if the controller's ability to just kind of make you feel things, feel more connected to the game, I'd have to say is really very special. And Far Cry 6 is an example of a game that actually takes advantage of it. And not every game does, obviously, but the ones that do, man, it is really something special. Like, you can make the argument that games might perform better or even look better on the Xbox Series X, but with that controller, like, the PlayStation 5 will always be competitive as long as developers are actually utilizing it. You know, and I'm a little worried about that because it is something that doesn't exist in the Xbox Series X. And let's face it, developers like to kind of, do uniform content. And they typically only try those type of things towards the beginning of a console launch unless it's successful. So all I'm really saying is if people don't really enjoy and embrace and really just find legitimate value in that feature, I'm sad to say I think they might drop it. But if people do love it, and they should because it's amazing, then hopefully that'll stick around. And that's actually like one of those things where like, hey man, maybe the PS5 version doesn't look as good or whatever, but that controller makes me actually not even feel like I'm playing a game. It makes me feel like I'm part of the experience. And that is legit special. And I wouldn't be surprised if PS6... they just kind of unify and say like, okay, we're going to have our own Game Pass competitor. We're going to keep everything kind of the same, blah, blah, blah. And some astute viewers out there who watched my previous video will acknowledge that I reported that this was like a PS4 Pro. This is like the ultimate PS4 Pro. So to their credit, and it's kind of hard to kind of explain the difference here. Yes, this thing does feel a lot like a PS4, but it also feels like its own thing. And that's kind of hard to explain because I think that's the whole problem, is that it is unique and yet it's not, and it's trying to cradle both of those things in the same go. But you have to remember at the end of the day, Sony is a Japanese company, and Japanese companies love to do traditional things. And I already see that guy out there who's like, actually, Sony moved to America a few years ago. They're based in California, nerd. You don't know what you're talking about. That's not true. I mean, yes, PlayStation technically uprooted and claims that they're based out of California, but if you think that Sony Japan isn't ultimately calling the shots on how the platform's distributed, then I have some land on the moon to sell you, because that's just not how corporations work. It's just, especially Japanese corporations. Traditionally, Japanese corporations have a tendency to basically outsource things and then intentionally undercut that branch so that they can blame it when it fails. There's actually a term for it in Japanese, which I don't remember, but more or less it's, hey, give it to California so that all the Americans are responsible for any sort of PlayStation decision, whether it's like, hey, we have to cut, the boobies out of the games or whatever. They can take the blame for it, and Japan looks blameless while also being able to say, damn it, Sony America, you shouldn't have done that, while we didn't really address it. But in the meantime, in the background, they're telling them, just do whatever the customer wants, or follow political trends or whatever you need to do. Anyway, that's basically irrelevant. All I'm saying is that with that mindset, that ultimately Sony Japan calls the shots, Sony Japan is going to want to do things traditionally. That's just how the Japanese are. But we'll have to see. You know, like we'll have to see where ultimately that goes. As I understand it, PlayStation 5 is actually not the biggest hit in Japan. Probably largely due to its size, I would guess. But you know, that in Japan is really moving towards a more mobile aspect. Hence, the Switch is much more popular there. But we'll see. You know, I mean, Sony is aiming for North America, and they're winning. I'm not saying they're not. I'm concerned where they're ultimately going, because I think rather than being historically, when it comes to home consoles, your trendsetters have been Nintendo and Sony with the PlayStation brand. You know, a lot of the time they follow each other, whatever. I mean, Sony always kind of clones a lot of what Nintendo does, but Nintendo just kind of like, you know, does whatever. Microsoft has always kind of been like trying to trend set, and aside from a few technical things here and there, like, hey, we'll put a hard drive in a console. We'll be the first to do that, other than technically the Sega Pluto. Other than that kind of thing, Microsoft doesn't really send like entire industry trends. Game Pass is kind of an industry trend. And if that prevails, as it looks like it might, you're going to find Sony for the first time ever following Microsoft's lead on something. And we'll see what happens with that. You know, I only own 4 PS4 games right in front of me at the moment. Well, I should say I only have 4 PS4 games right in front of me, so I thought I would just give you a quick look at them. I would have shown you all my Xbox Series X games, but I don't have any. None of them, because they don't really have any physical editions other than Flight Simulator. Anyway, so I got Demon's Souls. I played this in the original like review, and a lot of you guys were like, dude, you suck! I'm like, I killed everything that came at me, but I guess that makes me suck. I don't know. Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut, which I have not had enough time to play. I played a little bit of it. It was pretty cool, but I just haven't had much time for it. Spider-Man Miles Morales, which I actually really dug. Another one of these things where like, that game sucks. Why do you like it? It's like, it was fun. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I had a good time. I don't know why we're all mad at each other. And then last but not least, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, which this is actually, I think, the most interesting example given everything we've talked about. And this game actually gives me hope. I cling to hope because of this game. This is the only game so far on the PS5 where people have actually acted like they have traditionally and historically with a game console, which is that game is the reason you need X hardware. I haven't seen anybody say that about any other game on the PS5. People are like, dude, I would buy a PS5 just for Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. Which, granted, you can't do because, as we said at the beginning of the video, they're sold out everywhere anyway. But if they weren't, this is what you call a system seller, where people are like, this is something that is iconically associated with it. And all I'm trying to say is, and I'm sure you've thought of that many times, you go back and look at different consoles throughout history or just, growing up or whatever. You remember games where you're like, that's the game. That's the one I need because I need it for that console. That's the marriage right there. And that's why I need that. With the Xbox stuff, we're at a point where that isn't a thing. Like, yeah, you can say like Halo or whatever, but like, you really think like anybody is really super into Halo that didn't already have an Xbox or want to do it? It's just going to be a successful game on an ecosystem that already exists. But this game and others like it are just becoming a sad throwback to the reality that the era of like I have to have this for that is going away. And the first thing is, I know I'm going to get a lot of like negativity out of that because there is the opposite of that is people who legitimately believe exclusives are a bad thing and everything should be across everything and everything should be under a single ecosystem. Exactly the same base that Microsoft is trying to take us all towards. And I understand that logic. I really do. Like, it is super convenient. Like I said, I actually spend more time playing the Xbox for pretty much that reason. But the historian in me, I guess the child in me too, is going to miss this type of thing when a console was really associated with one game and the console itself was special because it had those games. And granted, I'm saying that very prematurely. Like, I'm saying that in concept. Whereas the reality is, I keep pointing out, PS6 will probably be a cookie cutter upgrade type of thing, and all this stuff will be compatible with it anyway, and it won't be special eventually. But for this 1 year in, where we are right now, it still feels like a traditional game console. for all its not traditional aspects, for its more modern aspects, its more modern trend-setting or following aspects, I should say, it still feels like an actual piece of history, an actual console in the line, upgrades and all. And I'm just trying to emphasize, if you like consoles and the history and all that sort of stuff that goes into them, savor that. Savor that moment. Savor this moment. And that concept. Because that's what we're losing. That's going to go away. And you won't even notice it until it's too late to have realized you missed it. You know, I hope they continue to make, special and exclusive, unique experiences, because those are what I truly value. Even though I do want other people to have access to those games and play them. It's just that I like the idea of a console actually mattering. And eventually they won't if they continue the Xbox model. So this is kind of aside from the Switch, I guess, this is kind of your last holdout for that type of thing. And even then, it's only like kind of there. So whatever. But anyway, if you guys could please like this video, comment on this video, subscribe if you're not subscribed, follow me on all the social media stuff in the description. Please, again, check out my new channel if you don't mind. Thank you again to Ubisoft for providing those games so that I could show them to you guys. And thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.